Chicago in late December was so cold it felt like your breath could turn to smoke.
The skyscrapers along Michigan Avenue glowed with golden lights strung like ribbons across the night sky. And there I was, Natalie Brooks, a freelance reporter for City Watch, standing in the deserted industrial district down south, where the wind carried the stench of rust and oil. 3 weeks chasing a strange disappearance in the financial world.
3 weeks without sleep, living on instant coffee and the fragile hope that I was still on the right track.
And now, all I had was an anonymous message. Want to know why they vanished tonight? South Point. Warehouse 17. When I arrived, the city seemed to have swallowed every sound. My beat-up Honda sat by the edge of the docks. No lights. No people, only the silver moon shining on a rusted sign.
I almost turned back.
Until the warehouse door creaked open by itself, as if someone had been waiting. Inside, the darkness was thick. The air reeked of damp cement and gasoline. I lifted my camera, the faint light flickering across cracked brick walls. From somewhere deeper in the shadows came voices, male, low, with a faint Italian accent. I followed the sound, step by cautious step.
When my phone's light cut through the gloom of a glass-walled room, I saw 6 men's suits, holstered guns, gathered around a steel table.
And at the center of them stood a tall man, dark-haired, the kind whose mere stance claimed the whole room.
I didn't need to see his face to know he was the one in charge.
I raised my lens, heart pounding.
A soft click.
That was all it took for 6 heads to turn at once. Before I could move, a flashlight blinded me. A voice barked in English.
"Stop right there."
I ran.
Footsteps thundered behind me, echoing through the hollow space like the sound of death.
I turned a corner, stumbled over wooden crates, the exit door ahead locked. When I spun around, they had me surrounded. And the man I'd just photographed, the one in the middle, began to walk toward me.
The lone bulb above flickered, casting light over his face, sharp, cold, and marked by a faint scar through his left eyebrow.
His eyes, they studied me like he already knew how this would end. "Who are you?" His voice was deep, smooth, and dangerous, laced with that soft Italian lilt. I'm a journalist. I didn't mean... Name? Natalie Brooks. Silence. He stepped closer, the faint scent of smoke and sandalwood closing around me. He held out his hand, palm open in unspoken order. I handed him my phone. He scrolled through the photos.
Stopped at the one of himself. His eyes narrowed, and then he smiled, the kind of smile that freezes blood.
"You're brave, or stupid." "I'm just doing my job." "No, now you're doing mine." A slight nod. 2 men stepped forward. I backed away, my voice trembling. "What are you going to do?" "Make sure you're still breathing by morning." He said it simply, then turned away.
A black SUV pulled up outside the warehouse.
They shoved me into the back seat. My heart was hammering so hard I could barely breathe. The city faded into the distance.
Through the fogged window, the skyline, the lights, the towers disappeared into the night as if they had never been there.
The man beside me said nothing. Streetlights flashed over his face in passing glows. I noticed his hand, long, rough fingers, wearing a silver ring engraved with a symbol, a hawk spreading its wings around a blue stone. "Who are you?" I asked quietly. "Vincent Hale." The name hung heavy in the air. I knew it. Everyone in Chicago did. The man who ruled the city's underworld, the Hale Syndicate. So I walked straight into the wolf's den. "No." His voice was steel. "You walked into a war, and you're lucky I didn't let you die in it." When I woke, I was lying on a white bed in a glass-walled room overlooking mist-covered pines. A strange house, too quiet, too clean. On a chair sat a neatly folded set of clothes. My phone, wallet, camera gone.
I opened the door and went downstairs.
The house was vast, almost like an old estate, lit by warm amber lamps. At the end of the hallway, he stood by the fireplace, white shirt, wine glass in hand. "You're awake."
"I want to leave."
"You can't." He said it like it was law. I clenched my fists. "You have no right." "Do you know where you are?" "Natalie Brooks." "Chicago." "Wrong. You're on my territory." Silence. The firelight danced in his eyes, deep, dark, but not entirely heartless. "If they had found you before I did, you'd be a nameless body floating in the river."
"Who are they?"
"The people you're investigating, they don't take hostages for ransom. They take them to erase evidence." A chill crawled down my spine. I don't believe you. That's fine. You'll soon learn who you should really be afraid of.
I turned toward the door.
But before I could touch it, his voice stopped me. If you cross that fence out there, no one will find you alive. Not even me. The calm in his tone was more terrifying than a threat. Beyond the glass, the forest stretched endlessly into darkness. In the reflection, I saw myself small, lost and behind me, his gaze steady and unreadable.
Why are you keeping me here?
So you'll live long enough to learn why they all disappeared? Then he turned away. It sounded both like a warning and a promise. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind howled outside the window, carrying the faint sound of the sea or maybe a machine somewhere far off. I couldn't tell. I stood by the glass, staring into the black woods. Somewhere out there, a shadow moved someone patrolling. And that's when I realized the truth. I wasn't a guest.
I was a prisoner. But the strangest thing wasn't the fear.
It was something else, a quiet, inexplicable curiosity. About the man whose eyes burned like embers under ash. About the secret buried beneath his silence. What I didn't know was that the moment I stepped through that threshold, the door that should never have opened my entire life had already changed. If you want to know what awaits Natalie beyond that door, follow part 2, The House Without an Exit. Morning here was so quiet it felt like even sunlight was afraid to disturb it.
I woke to a kind of peace that didn't feel real birds singing faintly beyond the open window, the scent of coffee and warm wood drifting through the air.
If not for the fear clawing in my chest, I might have believed I was in some luxury resort tucked away in the woods. But no, this was Vincent Hale's house. And I, Natalie Brooks, was the woman he had kept.
I walked downstairs. The hallway was carpeted in soft wool, tall windows opening to a mist-covered garden. Somewhere in the distance, a piano played low, heavy notes, as if someone were trapping their grief inside every key.
Vincent sat there, his back to me, white shirt sleeves rolled up to the elbow. His broad shoulders and steady movements radiated absolute control. On the table, a steaming espresso, a stack of documents, and a gun resting casually beside them. He didn't look at me, but his deep voice carried across the room, clear and deliberate. Black coffee, no sugar. That's how you like it, isn't it? I froze. He knew. I read your file. You have a file on me.
I have files on everyone who gets too close to my world.
I wanted to get angry, to throw something back at him, but all I could do was stand there, caught between the warmth of morning light and the cold edge of his words. Breakfast was already set: eggs, toast, fresh fruit. I sat down because I didn't know what else to do. Vincent kept reading, occasionally switching to Italian on a call, his tone sharp enough to cut the air. I ate, but everything tasted like nothing.
How long are you planning to keep me here? I asked. Until I'm sure you're no longer a risk.
I'm not a criminal.
No, he said, lifting his gaze to meet mine. But you're curious, and curiosity kills faster than bullets.
The words fell between us like a shard of ice. After breakfast, I was allowed to walk around the house. From the outside, the mansion looked serene like a lake forest estate, surrounded by maple trees and a small lake. But inside, something pressed against my lungs.
Every door was electronically locked.
Tiny cameras hid inside paintings, in hallway corners, even behind the mirrors in the living room. I tried one of the rear exits. A low warning hum echoed through the security system. Within seconds, a man in a black suit appeared. Please return inside, Miss Brooks. I bit my lip. Even my footsteps, it seemed, were not my own.
By afternoon, I found the library a warm room that smelled of old paper and dust. Hundreds of books lined the shelves, from philosophy to the history of the Italian Mafia. I brushed a finger across the spine of The Prince by Machiavelli and gave a bitter smile. Of course he'd read this.
A voice spoke behind me, quiet but firm enough to make me jump. Everyone reads it, few understand it. Vincent leaned against the doorway, afternoon light tracing the edge of his jaw, illuminating that calm, almost ruthless composure. I turned, steadying my breath. So why do you read it? To learn how to control people. No, he said, stepping closer, to understand what makes them betray. For a moment, our eyes met. There was something there, not threat, not even pity, but a silent recognition between two people who had both lost something. Then he said, slowly, I don't want you to die, Natalie, but if you keep digging, you will. Because of you. Because of the others.
I tightened my grip on the book in my hand.
You know who's behind those disappearances, don't you? Yes. And you won't tell me? No, because saying it aloud would sign both our death warrants. That evening, I sat alone on the balcony. The wind from the lake carried the scent of wet leaves. Down below, faint lights revealed men patrolling the perimeter. Rain began to fall, soft drops on the iron railing, cold needles against my skin. I missed Chicago, the car horns, the cramped apartment, the golden glow of my desk lamp as I wrote through the night. Here, in this grand mansion, I had everything except freedom. The door behind me opened quietly. Vincent stepped out, long coat damp from the rain. He stood beside me, saying nothing. You show up like I'm some problem that needs supervision. No, he said, eyes distant. You're something I didn't expect. I scoffed softly. A foolish journalist. Someone who still believes in justice. He said it without mockery, but with weariness, like a man who had forgotten what belief felt like. I wanted to ask more, but then he spoke first. My brother used to be like you. Silence. He's gone, Vincent murmured. Because of a mistake, mine. I turned to him. For the first time, I saw not just darkness in his eyes, but a quiet, unbearable sorrow. We stood there for a long while. The rain kept falling, city lights shimmering in the distance, fractured in the lake's reflection. Vincent took out a cigarette, lit it, and the smoke curled between us. I once thought power could save the people I loved. Didn't it? He looked at me and smiled faintly, the kind of smile only a man who's lost everything can wear. Power saves no one but itself, and even that's an illusion. I realized my heart was beating faster not from fear, but something far more dangerous and far gentler. Night fell. I returned to my room, but sleep wouldn't come. His words kept replaying, I don't want you to die. Part of me wanted to believe him. Another part whispered that in Vincent Hale's world, tenderness was just another kind of trap. I opened my laptop. Surprisingly, the Wi-Fi worked, though it only allowed access to a few sites. In one folder, I noticed a new file labeled For You. I hesitated, then clicked. Dozens of documents appeared: names, photos, financial records, missing persons, and the shell companies behind them. A network of international human trafficking, operating through the American financial system. And in the bottom corner of the screen, a familiar logo, Hale Group Holdings. My breath caught. Vincent's organization. My hands shook. Why would he let me see this? A single line appeared at the end of the file. You wanted the truth, Natalie. This is where it begins. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Instinctively, I slammed the laptop shut. The door opened. Vincent stood there, light from the corridor slicing across half his face. Can't sleep, he asked. No, I don't sleep much. He stepped closer, stopping just a few feet away. His gaze flicked toward the laptop, then locked on mine. You saw it, didn't you? I said nothing. Good, he murmured. At least now you know why you're here. You want me to investigate for you? No, I want you to see the truth before you twist it. And you, I asked, which part of that truth are you? He held my gaze for a long moment, something cold and something impossibly gentle flickering behind those eyes. The part you're not brave enough to touch yet? Then he turned and walked away, leaving me alone with the darkness and 1,000 unanswered questions. That night, I sat by the window until dawn, watching snow begin to fall over the forest. I realized I was standing between two worlds, one of justice, one of shadows. And Vincent Hale, the most dangerous man I'd ever met, was somehow the only one leading me closer to the truth. But that truth, I sensed, wouldn't just cost me my career. It would cost me my heart. Snow had fallen for 3 days straight. The mansion lay hidden deep within the maple woods, blanketed in white, as if winter itself had swallowed it whole. Every road leading out had turned into silent ribbons of ice. I was beginning to lose all sense of time. Mornings blurred into cold light and untouched coffee on the table. At night, the same haunting piano melody drifted through the house, slow, lonely, aching. Strangely, though I hated being trapped here, I found myself waiting for that sound. On the 10th day, Vincent appeared in the library, holding a steaming cup of tea. He was dressed in black, the top button of his shirt undone, sleeves rolled up to reveal a worn leather watch. He didn't look as immaculate as before, more human, somehow. Or maybe, I had started to see him differently. Have you read through all the files I left you? Most of them, I said, glancing up. And I think you still haven't told me everything. He set down the cup and sat across from me. Which part do you think I'm hiding?
The one with your signature on those transactions.
Vincent didn't deny it. His gaze fixed on the candle between us, his voice lowering, calm but heavy.
Some things can only be stopped from the inside. You have to stand in the dark to keep it from spreading.
That sounds like something a villain says to justify himself. He gave a faint, humorless smile. Maybe, but if I hadn't done it, hundreds would have died, including you. I said nothing. Sometimes the coldest truths were the hardest to argue against. That afternoon, I saw him outside, target shooting in the snow. It was ankle deep in blinding white, yet he stood there as if the cold couldn't touch him.
Each gunshot cracked through the air with perfect precision.
The silver light caught his profile, the curve of his shoulders, the thin scar through his brow beautiful in a way I couldn't name.
When he noticed me at the porch, he simply said,
"Want to try?" Me. "Who else?" He handed me the gun, his hand wrapping around mine to guide it.
His skin was warm, the metal, freezing. My pulse was wild against the steady rhythm of his breath behind me.
"Don't fear it," he murmured close enough that I could feel his breath on my neck. "I'm not afraid."
Aren't you?
The shot rang out. I flinched, but the bullet hit dead center. He smiled slightly.
Better than some I've trained.
I'm honored. "No, it's a warning," he said, his tone sharpening. "In this world, those who can't hold a gun are the first to fall." That night, after he left, I went to the small room behind the library, the one I'd seen him enter before. Inside was a study walls covered with maps, red pins marking routes, names, and dates. At the center hung a symbol, a hawk with outstretched wings the same as on his ring. Beside it was an old photograph, two young men standing side by side. One was Vincent. The other looked like him, only softer, his eyes bright with a kind of innocence. The note beneath read, "Gabriel Hale, 1992-2018. I froze. I didn't need to ask. He was Vincent's brother. When I turned, Vincent was standing in the doorway. Not angry, just silent, the kind of silence that pressed against your chest. He died because of the people I'm investigating, didn't he? No, because he trusted the wrong person, Vincent said quietly. Stepping inside. A journalist. She tried to expose the trafficking network. Gabriel believed in her, believed that truth would save everyone. He stopped, eyes locking on mine. They killed her, and used Gabriel to send a message. A chill ran down my spine. Now I understood why he hated me, why he despised curiosity. "I'm not her," I whispered. "I know, but you're alike in one way both think words can save people." He turned away, lighting a cigarette. The flame flared briefly, revealing exhaustion etched into his face.
The truth is, sometimes justice needs hands willing to get dirty.
That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought about Gabriel, about the journalist I'd never met but somehow felt bound to. And I thought about Vincent, the man who terrified me and yet pulled me closer with every unspoken word. Near dawn, I heard footsteps.
I opened my door. Vincent stood in the hallway, dark coat on, his face tense.
"What happened?" "One of my facilities was hit," he said quickly. "No deaths. But they know you're here." "You think they're after me?" "I know they are." He hesitated, meeting my eyes. "You're my weakness, Natalie." For a heartbeat, I forgot to breathe. It wasn't accusation, it was confession. "I'll move you somewhere safer."
I'm not going anywhere.
"Don't be stubborn." "I've been running from what I believe in all my life. I'm done running." He fell silent. The look between us wasn't defiance anymore. It was something fragile, dangerous, undefined. "You're really not afraid of me." "I am," I admitted, "but fear doesn't mean I want to leave." He smiled, tired, but soft in a way I hadn't seen before.
You have no idea what you're saying.
"Maybe not," I said quietly, "but at least I know who I'm saying it to." The next morning, Vincent was gone. No one would say where. The house felt heavier, hollow. At noon, one of the guards handed me an envelope. Inside was a single handwritten note. "If I don't come back, trust no one. The data on your computer is enough to burn half this city down. Keep it, and remember what you've seen is only the surface." I read it again and again, my fingers turning numb. For the first time since being here, I felt true fear not of being captive, but of him not returning. By dusk, the intercom buzzed. A man's voice, Italian accented, said, "Miss Brooks, Mr. Hale requests you in his office." I nearly ran. Vincent sat behind his desk, shirt stained with dried blood. When I rushed forward, he lifted a hand to stop me. "It's nothing, just a scratch." "You're hurt." "Not enough to matter," he said, forcing a faint smile. "We've got bigger problems." He slid a stack of photos across the desk. Faces I recognized the missing people I'd been investigating. Under each photo was a Seal Androvia group, a name I'd never seen before. "They're the American branch of the Andrangheta," he explained. "And right now, you're a threat to them." "Why me?" I just write. "Because you've connected the dots better than anyone else." His gaze deepened, unflinching. "And because I let you live." The words struck like a blade. Something inside me cracked, yet everything suddenly made sense. He hadn't saved me out of duty. It was something else, something neither of us dared to name. I wanted to speak, but couldn't. Vincent stood, stepped closer, until only one breath separated us. "From now on, you're not just an observer, Natalie," he said softly, almost like a vow. "You're part of this now." I saw the dried blood on his sleeve, the restrained pain in his eyes, the weight of too many sins. And I realized I'd already gone too far to turn back. Outside, snow kept falling, but in that room, something else had begun to melt. Slowly, silently, irreversibly. That night, the snow fell so thick it seemed the sky had been swallowed by a white blanket. The wind howled through the window frames, rattling the tiles a cold, endless sound like someone whispering outside. Vincent had been gone for almost a day. No calls, no messages, no one knew where he was. I sat by the window, watching the flakes drift lazily through the dark, and realized I was worried. Not for myself, but for him. I let out a small laugh, mocking myself. A prisoner, worrying about her captor, how absurd. Around midnight, the hallway lights flickered on. An engine roared in the driveway. I ran downstairs without even grabbing a coat. The door swung open, and there he was. Vincent stepped inside, his coat covered in snow, shoulders soaked. A streak of blood ran down his arm, dark and wet against the fabric. He said nothing, just tilted his head slightly, dismissing his guards. When the door closed, I saw it clearly, blood seeping through his shirt, crimson against white. "You're hurt." "It's nothing." "Don't lie to me." I pulled him toward the couch, heart pounding as I helped him out of his heavy coat that smelled of smoke and rust. The wound was deep, a gash that exposed bruised flesh beneath the torn skin. I found the first aid kit, my hands trembling as they touched his skin cold as ice. "You need stitches." "A bandage will do. I'll be fine tomorrow." "Who do you think you are, Superman?" He gave a quiet laugh, then hissed when the antiseptic met his skin. "You're not afraid of blood." "I photographed crime scenes. Vincent, I'm afraid of corpses, not people still trying to live." For the first time, he was silent. The firelight flickered across his face, the faint shadows under his eyes, the strength in his jaw tempered by exhaustion. The room was too quiet. Only the wind outside and his unsteady breathing filled the air. I stitched him up carefully, afraid to hurt him. Vincent watched me, his gaze softer now, warm, fragile, almost human. "Who did this?" I asked. "Someone who used to work for me. Now he works for them." "Why?" "Money or fear." I looked up at him. "Do you ever regret it?" "Regret what?" "The life you chose?" He didn't answer right away. The fire glowed in his eyes, reflecting a truth he'd buried too long. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, rough around the edges. "I regret letting my brother believe the world could be saved by the truth." I stopped. It was the first time I'd heard the word regret from his lips. His voice sounded like an old wound, one that never healed. When I finished, he reached out and touched my hand. His palm was warm but trembling slightly. "Thank you." "I didn't do it for you." "I know." He smiled faintly, "But thank you anyway." I stepped back, heart racing so fast I was sure he could hear it. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of burning wood. Vincent leaned back, eyes closed. For the first time, he looked normal. Not a mafia boss, not a man made of steel and secrets, just a human being, tired and alone, carrying too much on his shoulders. I don't know why I did it, instinct. Maybe compassion, but I took a blanket and draped it over him. As I turned to leave, his hand caught my wrist. "Stay." His voice was barely more than a whisper, almost a plea. I froze. He opened his eyes deep, dark, endless. I said nothing, just sat beside him quietly. Time slowed. I could hear the wind, my heartbeat, his breathing steady now. Between us, the silence no longer felt dangerous. It felt safe.
Then he spoke softly, as if afraid to disturb the fragile air.
Do you ever think loving someone can be a sin? I turned toward him. Depends on who that someone is. He gave a sad smile. And if that someone is a man like me, then it's a sin worth committing. I didn't know why I said it. Maybe because, in that moment, with snow falling outside and his guard finally down, he didn't look like a man to be feared, but one who had been fighting loneliness for too long. Our eyes met. Neither of us looked away, and neither spoke again. When I woke, daylight filled the room. Vincent was still there, though the fire had burned out to glowing embers. He was staring out the window, where snow fell in heavy sheets. I stood, wrapped my coat tighter, and walked toward him. You didn't sleep? Didn't need to. How's your shoulder? You did well. I smiled faintly. So, am I free to leave yet? Not yet, he said, still watching the snow. But you can come with me.
Where to?
To meet the person who sent you that first photo. I froze. You know who it is? I know everything, he said quietly, turning to me. You're just not ready to hear it. We left the mansion by dusk. The car rolled through snow-laden roads, the forest on both sides dark and still. Neither of us spoke, only the wind howled against the glass. When we finally stopped, I realized where we were in Old Cemetery. Gravestones dotted the white field, their letters faded by time. Vincent opened the door, stepping into the cold. The man who sent you that message, he said, worked for me once. He was dead before you even received it. I stared at him, disbelief knotting my throat. Then who sent it? He answered, voice low cold, yet threaded with sorrow. I did. My mind went blank. Why? I wanted to see how far you'd go for the truth. You tested me. No, I wanted to believe someone out there was still brave enough not to run.
We stood before a grave. The name carved in stone read Gabriel Hale.
Vincent knelt, laying a bundle of dried flowers in the snow. If he were still alive, what do you think he'd do? I asked softly. He'd hate me. And me. Vincent turned to me, his gaze slow, deep, cutting through every wall I'd built. I don't know yet. The wind picked up, scattering a few petals across the snow. I reached out, brushing his hand gently. For the first time, he didn't pull away. In the freezing air of Chicago, his hand was warm as if his blood was burning to fight the winter itself. We drove back in silence. I watched the snow blur past the window and realized something inside me had shifted. I wasn't afraid of Vincent Hale anymore.
I was afraid of the world turning him into a monster before I ever saw him truly smile.
In the days that followed, the snow in Chicago began to melt. Lake Michigan no longer hid behind mist, and the glass towers shimmered faintly under the pale light of dawn. The city seemed reborn, but inside me, everything had only just begun to fall apart.
I returned to my old apartment, the place that used to mean my life before all this, but it no longer felt like home.
The peeling paint on the walls, the worn desk, the stack of magazines, they were all still there. Only I had changed. After what I'd seen, what I now knew, I was no longer Natalie Brooks, the stubborn reporter who believed truth alone could save the world. I told no one about Vincent, and I never spoke of the mansion hidden among the maples. The only person who knew I was still alive was Jessica, my best friend and editor at City Watch. You vanished for 2 weeks. Nat, I thought you were dead. I had a small accident. An accident that leaves a bullet scar on your shoulder, she said, frowning at the pink line I hadn't bothered to cover. I looked away. Jessica sighed, but her eyes were full of concern. What are you really investigating? I got an anonymous message telling me to stop digging. They mentioned your name.
I froze.
Who sent it? No idea, encrypted email, but I've got a bad feeling. The doorbell rang, cutting her off. I opened the door, and my heart stopped. Vincent stood there.
In a dark suit, he looked completely out of place in this world of small apartments, cheap coffee, and flickering neon.
His gaze swept over Jessica before landing on me. We need to talk.
We sat across from each other in a tiny cafe at the end of the street.
Vincent didn't touch his espresso. He simply watched me in silence as if trying to read my reaction to seeing him here, in daylight, among ordinary people.
I told you not to look for me, I said.
I didn't. I'm protecting you.
From whom?
From the people you just emailed? I blinked. You're tracking me. I'm tracking the ones tracking you. he replied evenly. Natalie, you're being hunted. That night, I opened my email. 2 unread messages waited, from an unknown sender. The content was simple, just 4 words. Stop digging, sweetheart. Attached was a photo me sitting in the cafe with Jessica. It had been taken from across the street, at the exact same moment Vincent was there. My hand shook. It felt like the world no longer had a line between protector and threat. The next morning, I went to the newsroom. The air was heavy. People stared at me strangely. On the main screen, a news broadcast played. Billionaire Vincent Hale, head of Hale Group Holdings, is under investigation for suspected ties to the Androvia Group's underground financial network. I froze. His face filled the screen calm, unreadable, those black eyes revealing nothing. The same man who'd sat by a fire days ago while I stitched his wound in silence. Do you know him? Jessica asked quietly. I stared at the screen. No, I don't know who he is. That afternoon, Vincent came for me. He wasn't the wounded man from before. He was the crime lord again, dark coat, buttoned shirt, eyes sharp as a blade. You saw the news? Yes. Do you believe it? I don't know. He stepped closer, the light from the window dividing his face into 2 halves, light and shadow, like the man himself. Natalie, I'm giving you a choice. A choice. Believe me, or believe what they tell you. And if I choose wrong, then we both die. We left the city that night. A black car cutting through the snow, heading west beyond the suburbs. He said nothing, and I didn't dare ask. We stopped at an abandoned warehouse near the industrial district where it all began. He said, inside, the air was freezing. Vincent turned on a projector. On the wall appeared a web of images, documents, offshore accounts, transport routes, people, and money moving across borders like ghosts. This is the proof of the Androvia Group, and of me, he said quietly. My company once hid their money. Now I'm using that same network to destroy them from within. I turned to him, my voice barely a whisper. You're working with the FBI. Not officially. They'd rather arrest me than help me. Then why show me all this? Because you're the only one who can make people believe it. His eyes met mine, heavy, tired, but filled with something like faith. I don't need anyone to think I'm innocent. I just need someone to know I'm not entirely a monster. That night, I couldn't sleep. The cold air hummed through the cracks in the wall. The single lamp cast a faint circle of light. Vincent sat in the corner, back against the wall, eyes lost somewhere far away. I moved closer, sat beside him. You know, I whispered, if I write about you, people will say you bought me. They'll say that no matter what you write, he said, not looking at me. Then what do you actually want from me? He turned, his voice low, almost gentle. I want you to survive writing it. We didn't speak after that. His fists were clenched, knuckles white, the hands of a man who had once ruled half of Chicago's underworld, now trembling not from fear for himself, but for me. I woke to the sound of rain. Thunder rolled outside. Raindrops hammered the metal roof in a slow, mournful rhythm. Vincent was on the phone, his tone sharp, urgent. No, I told you she's not involved. Keep your distance. Do you hear me? He turned, realizing I was awake. They know you're still with me. So what? They'll use you? He stepped closer, gripping my shoulders. If anything happens, Natalie, don't look for me. Run, disappear. You're talking like you expect to die. I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid you'll have to watch. I didn't know why I did it. Maybe fear, or maybe the ache of knowing I'd regret it if I didn't. I reached up and touched his face. For the first time, Vincent didn't pull away. He closed his eyes, as though that small touch was the only real thing left in a world built on lies. The distance between us vanished. The kiss came slowly, hesitant, trembling not of possession, but of two people standing on the edge of something neither could escape. Outside, the storm raged on, but in that moment, everything else disappeared. Only breath, the faint scent of gunpowder, and the strange peace of finding each other on opposite sides of the same line. When the rain stopped, I opened my eyes. Vincent was gone. On the table lay a folded note, written in his hand. If you truly want the truth, start with the name Adrian Greco. Below it, an address in New York. Beside the words, a small streak of dried blood. From that moment, I knew everything had changed. This was no longer just an investigation. It was a war between faith and guilt, between love and darkness where only one could survive. The night train reached New York at 3 in the morning. The city never slept. The skyscrapers still burned with light, like a silent warning.
I pulled my old suitcase behind me, stepping out of the station into the blur of rain, fog, and restless crowds.
In my hand was the paper Vincent had left Adrian Greco, the ink now smudged by rain. That name was the beginning of everything that remained the truth, the darkness, and the reason Vincent had vanished. I rented a small room in Lower Manhattan, barely enough for a desk and my laptop. For the first 3 days, I combed through old files, press archives, corporate records, investment chains. Adrian Greco wasn't a public name, but Greco Holdings was a clean-looking financial empire running investment funds and logistics companies across the East Coast. What caught my attention was a single buried detail. One of the founding shareholders had once been Gabriel Hale Vincent's younger brother. That evening, I received a text from an unknown number.
"You're walking into his territory. Stop."
I deleted it. But minutes later, my phone rang. A deep, cold male voice spoke. "Is this Natalie Brooks?" "Who's calling?" "If you want to know about Vincent Hale, meet me at Pier 43. 10 o'clock?
The line went dead before I could respond.
Pier 43 lay along the Hudson. Rain fell harder, waves slamming against the concrete shore like war drums. I followed the rows of shipping containers until I saw a black SUV idling in the shadows. The door opened. A tall man stepped out, gray hair, sharp face, eyes the color of winter steel. "Agent Lang, FBI." "FBI. We've been tracking Vincent Hale for 3 years, and now you show up, carrying his data? Do you even know what you're holding?" I stayed silent. Lang went on. "Adrian Greco runs Androvaya's U.S. network. He used to be Hale's partner. They split after Gabriel Hale's death." My chest tightened. "You mean Vincent killed his brother?" "No, but he caused it. He handed over the wrong man, and Greco pulled the trigger." I stood frozen in the rain. Lang's gaze was a mix of pity and steel. "You think you know him, don't you? Trust me, Hale's only good when it serves him." "Then why did he save me?" Lang gave a cold half-smile. "Maybe you remind him of someone he lost."
I turned away. I didn't know if I was angry or afraid that he was right. When I got back to my room, the door was ajar.
My heartbeat quickened. I stepped inside, and there he was. Vincent sat in the chair, drenched from the rain, his old wound still healing. He watched me silently, as if the world outside no longer existed. You thought I was dead, didn't you?" "I don't know what to think anymore." He rose slowly, closing the distance between us. "I told you not to look for Greco."
"You don't get to tell me what to fear."
"I do when I'm the reason they want you dead." His voice was low, exhausted, torn between anger and despair. "Greco wants the data I gave you. He's already killed 2 of my men in Boston trying to find you." "Then why are you here?" "To end it." Vincent opened a case and spread files across the table. Photographs of missing women, shipping routes, transaction codes. Greco's using his logistics company as cover. He's trafficking women, children from Europe to the U.S. He paused, his voice almost a growl. "The only piece he doesn't have is the proof you're holding." I stared at him, my hand trembling. "What are you going to do?" "End him in the only way the law can't." "You mean kill him?" "If I have to." "If you do that, you'll be no different from him." "I never was." Silence fell over the room. Outside, a ship's horn echoed across the river, swallowed by the rain. I stepped closer, resting my hand on the scar at his shoulder. "You say you're the reason Gabriel died, but if you die for revenge, you'll kill whatever part of him still lives in you." Vincent looked at me for so long I thought he'd pull away. He didn't.
When he finally spoke, his voice cracked.
"I didn't know I still had that part, until you." That night, we left New York. He drove. I sat beside him, watching lightning flare against the clouds. Neither of us spoke, not until we'd crossed the state line. Greco's base is in New Jersey. If I don't come back, give the data to Lang. "You'll come back." "I'm not sure." "I didn't come this far to watch you die." "Then you shouldn't have loved me."
I froze.
He didn't look at me, but I saw his hands tighten around the wheel until his knuckles went white. "I didn't choose to love you," I said softly, "but I can't pretend I don't." The car sped through the storm as if trying to outrun fate itself. By the time we arrived, dawn was breaking. An abandoned warehouse complex surrounded by electrified fencing and motion lights. Vincent checked his gun, then handed me a smaller one. "If anything happens, run, don't come back." "No, I stay." He didn't argue, just looked at me for a long moment, then touched my face gently. "I lost someone once because he believed in justice. I can't lose another because I believe in love." Then he turned away. I gripped the gun, my pulse thundering in my ears. The first gunshot split the morning. Then came the chaos, shouting, bullets, the acrid sting of gunpowder. I hid behind a stack of crates, watching Vincent and his men storm the building. I wanted to believe he'd make it until Adrian Greco appeared. He was younger than I expected, elegant in a white suit, his smile cold as glass. He raised his gun aimed at Vincent. I screamed, the shot exploded. And everything went dark. When I woke, I was in an ambulance. Flashing red lights, the metallic scent of blood. A man in an FBI jacket leaned over me, his voice muffled by the sirens. I only caught his last words. "Greco's dead. Hale's missing." Missing. Not dead, but not alive either. I clutched the blanket, tears sliding silently down my face. Outside the window, snow was falling again so white it was impossible to tell where sky ended and earth began. Days later, the FBI announced Operation Clean Line.
Over 30 members of the trafficking network were arrested.
Greco Holdings collapsed overnight. The media called it a war between two ghosts. No one mentioned the person who started it all. I wrote my final piece for City Watch. No line, no source. Just one line at the end. Justice isn't light, it's fire, it burns everything, even the one who ignites it.
On my last night in New York, I stood by the river, the wind cutting sharp and cold. In my pocket, the silver ring he once wore the hawk with spread wings felt icy against my skin.
I threw it into the dark water, listening to the faint splash like a farewell.
I didn't know if Vincent Hale was still alive.
I only knew that since that night. When snow fell over that ruined warehouse, I had loved a man who could never belong to the light. Spring came early that year in Chicago. The city shed its last layer of snow, revealing a pale blue sky and the damp scent of Lake Michigan.
People said spring was the season of beginnings, but to me, it was only a reminder that winter never truly left.
3 months had passed since the explosion in New Jersey.
3 months since Vincent Hale had vanished without a trace, no body, no signal, nothing but a void between headlines and memory.
I returned to the City Watch newsroom at Jessica's request. The office still smelled of paper and printer ink, but the looks I received had changed. People watched me like I carried something dangerous, something they didn't dare name. "They think you worked with the Mafia," Jessica said bluntly.
I worked with the truth. I replied, though even I wasn't sure if that was still true.
She slid a folder across the desk. "The FBI sent this morning. They want you to assist on a case remnants of the Greco network." I thought they cleaned it up. No one ever cleans up all the darkness, Nat.
I opened the file.
Amid the reports and white pages, one name stood out, Bellini Christopher, age 29, successor to Greco. Beside it, a blurred photo, a young face, cold, with a thin smile sharp as a blade. That night, as I was typing in my apartment, a knock came at the door. 3 knocks, soft, slow, and familiar enough to stop my heart. I opened it. Vincent stood there. He was thinner, his hair longer, his eyes darker so deep I was afraid to blink. His black shirt was damp from the rain, but his voice was the same, low, steady, dangerous in its calm. "You really believed I was dead, didn't you?" I didn't answer. I just looked at him, my chest tight, terrified that if I spoke, he'd disappear again. "Why didn't you contact me?" "Because I needed to vanish. And let me think you were..." "Dead," he cut in, his gaze faltering. Maybe that's what I deserved. I stepped back, emotions crashing like waves, anger, relief, pain, all tangled together. "Do you have any idea what I've been through these 3 months?" "I know." "No, you don't." My voice broke. I identified 2 wrong bodies. I was followed. Every night I expected someone to knock and tell me you were really gone. Vincent said nothing.
Then he stepped forward and placed both hands on my shoulders.
"I'm sorry." Those 2 words from a man who had never bowed to anyone stole the breath from my lungs. I whispered.
"I don't need your apology. Vincent, I need to know why you're still alive."
He looked at me for a long moment, then said quietly,
"To pay my debt to Gabriel, and to you."
He told me the explosion in New Jersey had been staged, his own plan to fake his death and mislead the remaining members of Androvaya and Bellini. The man now rebuilding the shattered network. Bellini's more dangerous than Greco ever was. He doesn't crave power, he wants to prove I'm weak.
And you think pretending to be a ghost makes you stronger?
No, coming back when he thinks I've turned to ash does. I clenched my fists, fighting the tremor in my voice. What do you need from me? To write. Write? An article of fake investigation. Make Bellini believe the FBI is preparing to indict him. When he shows himself, I'll end it.
I let out a dry laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd.
You want to use me as bait again? No, as a partner. He paused. But I'll understand if you say no. I looked at him. Gone was the arrogance, the half-smile. All that remained was the man beneath dark eyes carrying something close to pleading. And I nodded. The article went live 4 days later, titled, Greco's Heir, the New Arm of Androvia in New York.
The media exploded.
That evening, I received an email. You're playing a dangerous game. Natalie Brooks. Sender CB?
I'd expected him to reach out, just not so soon.
Moments later, Vincent appeared at my door. He didn't speak, just placed a small black device on the table.
A tracker.
You mean he's coming? Tonight, or sooner. At midnight, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was smooth, familiar, poisonous. Nice article, Natalie, but I don't like seeing my name dragged through the dirt. Why don't we meet and edit it together? I heard his dry laugh. Where? The rooftop of the Harrington Hotel. Come alone. Vincent nodded when I told him.
We both knew it was a trap, but also the only chance.
The Harrington stood in the heart of downtown, wind slicing across its metal railings. I stepped onto the rooftop, the night air sharp against my face. Bellini was waiting long coat, cigarette glowing red between his fingers. Such a shame. Natalie, he said, you could have been a brilliant journalist if you hadn't chosen the devil's side. You're mistaken, I replied evenly. I don't take sides, I just write the truth. The truth, he sneered. The truth is, Hale killed his brother to climb higher. The truth is, he betrayed the very syndicate that made him. You think you're any different? You betray to survive just like the rest of us. I stared at him. You speak as if you know loyalty. I know it better than anyone. He drew his gun. But before his finger could tighten, another gunshot rang out. Bellini dropped to his knees. Behind him, Vincent stepped from the shadows. You never understood, Chris. It happened so fast I barely registered it. Vincent knelt, checking Bellini's pulse alive, but barely. Why didn't you kill him? I asked. Because Gabriel wouldn't forgive me if I did. He stood and turned toward me. The city lights flickered in his eyes, half darkness, half peace. It's over, Natalie. What do you mean? The job, the war, it's done. And after that, he didn't answer, maybe because he didn't know.
I stepped closer, feeling the warmth of his breath against my skin.
Vincent Hale, I whispered, so softly the wind nearly stole the words. If you disappear again, I won't come looking. He smiled faintly, weary, but genuine. I won't make you. The next morning, sunlight spilled through my window.
On my desk lay a newspaper, my article, reprinted on the front page.
Beneath it, a small folded note written in black ink.
I'll come back when the world stops calling justice a crime.
V.H. I folded the note and slipped it into my pocket. Outside, Chicago glowed in the spring light. And for the first time in a long while, I smiled. Because even between two worlds, light and darkness, we were still walking in the same direction. A month after the Harrington Hotel incident, Chicago finally thawed. The city looked washed clean streets slick with melting snow, mist rising from Lake Michigan, reflecting the morning light like a giant mirror. I stood by the window of the 10th floor apartment, once Vincent Hale's temporary office. On the table, a cup of coffee still steamed beside the morning paper, its headline stretching across the page. Hale Group officially dissolved, Chairman Vincent Hale still missing. The media had already moved on. The police had closed the case. But I couldn't, because even if the world believed he was gone, I still felt him in the smallest things. The rough timbre of his voice when he said, "Don't be afraid." The faint trace of mint and smoke on his shirts. And that gaze deep, quiet, the kind you could lose yourself in forever. Jessica stepped into the room, dropping a folder onto the desk. Nat, the FBI just cleared you. You're officially off their watch list. Good, I said softly. They should have done that months ago. There's something else. She hesitated. They recovered part of a hard drive from the Greco warehouse fire. Connected to Vincent. Not sure, but one of the encrypted files matches his system. They're asking for your help to decrypt it. I looked out the window, my heart tightening. That name still felt like a whisper. Gentle, painful, inescapable. I'll take a look. That night, I opened the file. The first line appeared on the screen. If you're reading this, it means I didn't keep my promise. My chest tightened. I could almost hear his voice low, steady, threaded with the weariness I'd never seen before. I thought I could leave everything behind. But when I saw the light in your eyes, I knew I never escaped the one thing I still wanted to believe, that even someone like me could be loved. I brushed my fingers across the screen, tears falling before I realized it. There were no photos, only fragments, notes, records, and letters. Each line felt like a piece of him, memories of Gabriel, the organization, and the past he had never told me. 3 days later, Agent Lang from the FBI called. Brooks, we need to see you. There's something you should look at. The West Side Field Office, a small interrogation room, dimly lit. Lang slid a photograph across the table, a grainy image from a Boston dock camera. A tall man in a dark coat, boarding a cargo ship marked Highland. The picture was blurry, but I recognized the way he walked immediately. Vincent. We're not certain, Lang said. His face is obscured, but the satellite data matches his old tracking pattern. If it's him, he's heading for Europe. What are you going to do? Nothing. He's no longer under investigation. I stared at the photo again. Fog shrouded the Boston harbor, and there he was alone, walking into the blank white of the world. That night, I couldn't sleep. I remembered the last time I'd seen him on the rooftop of the Harrington. City lights glinting in his eyes as he said, I'll come back when justice stops being treated as a crime. It had sounded like a riddle then, but I believed him. Not because I was naive, but because from that moment on, I understood. Vincent Hale had never lost faith. He was simply trying to survive in a world that had no place for men with hearts. I took a leave of absence and left Chicago. My journey began in Paris, where I tracked down those who once worked with Hale Group. Posing as an international investigative journalist, I scoured bank archives, traced shipping routes, and followed any whisper of Highland. Then one name surfaced in the customs records, Lisbon, an old Portuguese port, once a hub for smuggling. If Vincent was still alive, that would be where he'd go for the sea, for freedom, and for anonymity. Lisbon greeted me with salt in the air and the rhythm of waves. Terracotta roofs lined the hillsides, the afternoon sun spilling gold over the cobblestone streets. I rented a small room near the harbor and started asking questions. On the third day, an old dock worker mentioned a tall American, quiet type, plays piano at a bar down the street. I followed his directions. The wooden door creaked open. The smell of whiskey and sound of piano drifted out together. The melody slow, aching Clair de Lune by Debussy. And in the far corner, I saw him. Vincent sat at the piano, shoulders slightly bowed, sleeves rolled to his elbows, fingers gliding over the keys. The dim light brushed against his face, the same face I remembered, only softer now, calmer, as if he had finally laid down a lifetime of sins. I walked closer. When he looked up, time stopped. No surprise, no words, just a look that said everything. You found me, he murmured. This time, it wasn't easy. He smiled, truly smiled, the kind of smile untouched by darkness. I thought you wouldn't come. You should know me better than that. He reached out his hand, and I took it. His skin was warm, real, alive. I didn't ask where he'd been, who he was now, or what he'd done to survive. Because in that moment, I didn't see the Mafia boss, or the ghost of a past life. I saw Vincent, the man who once stood between shadow and light so I could walk through. We sat by the sea until dawn. He told me that after Harrington, he knew the FBI would never stop watching, so he staged another death. He left the U.S. with forged documents, assuming the identity of a dead man from Florence, living quietly here under the name Vince Morel. I thought I'd never play the piano again, he said. But one night, I heard Clair de Lune. It reminded me that no matter how dark the world gets, there's always a place for the light to slip in. I rested my head on his shoulder, listening to the rhythm of the waves steady, like a heartbeat. Will you ever go back to America? No, Hale is dead there. But here, Vince is still learning how to live. And me, he asked softly. I don't know, I said. But if the world still needs someone to tell its stories, I'll tell them about a man who chose love over hate. He squeezed my hand gently. You were never just the storyteller. Natalie, you're the reason people like me still want to live.
When the sun rose, its first light spread across the sea. I looked at him, the soft gold catching in his brown eyes, warm as honey.
No more secrets, no more lies. We didn't speak. We didn't need to.
The waves spoke for us, steady, endless.
One chapter had closed. Another had begun, one that didn't need an ending or a promise. All I knew was that he was alive, and I still believed. And sometimes, as Debussy once wrote,
light doesn't defeat darkness. It simply learns to live beside it.
Summer arrived softly in Lisbon, like a whispered secret. In the mornings, sunlight spilled through the window and across the wooden table, where Vincent brewed coffee with an old silver pot he'd bought from the antique market. The aroma of coffee mingled with the salt of the sea, a scent that felt both warm and fleeting. He was no longer the mafia boss I had once written about in headlines. Now, he was Vince Morel, a dark-haired man in a white shirt, living in a modest seaside apartment and playing piano for tourists at night. No one knew he had once commanded an empire built on shadows. And I wrote, not for newspapers, not for the world,
just for myself, fragments of his life scattered across pages, as if I feared that one day, the sea might wash away every trace of our story.
At night, the bar where he played was always full. The crowd fell silent the moment his hands touched the keys. There was something in his playing delicate as breath, yet every note carried a soul, as if he were speaking the words he could never say aloud. I always sat in the corner, a glass of red wine in hand, watching him. The golden light bathed his face in a haze that made everything look dreamlike. And sometimes, when he looked up, his eyes found mine among the strangers. In that instant, with just one glance, I knew he remembered. He was still him. One evening, after the bar closed, I asked, "Do you ever think about going back?" Vincent leaned against the piano, wiping his hands with a cloth, his gaze distant. "Back where? America? Chicago?" "No." His voice was quiet. "There. They only remember Hale, the man who died. Vince just wants to live. But you can't live like this forever. No one can live forever. Natalie, we can only choose how we live." His answer fell softly, but it hollowed something inside me. I realized then that even beside me, he was still caught between two worlds, part of him forever bound to a past he could never escape.
A week later, I received an email from Jessica.
The message was short, but it froze my blood. "Lang is dead. Androvia isn't gone. They know Hale is alive."
I turned to Vincent.
He stayed silent for a long time, as if he'd been expecting this day. "What are you going to do?" "They won't stop. And if I stay here, they'll come for you." "So you're leaving?" "I have to." "No, not again." I stood up, my voice breaking. "I'm not letting you disappear this time." He stepped closer, his hand brushing my cheek with the gentleness of wind. "You once said you loved a man who didn't belong to the light. Do you know what that really means? It means pain, but choosing to stay anyway. And for me," his voice sank lower, "to love means leaving, so the one I love can live." That night, the rain came hard. I didn't know when he left. Only when I woke did I find the room empty, no music, no scent of coffee, just a sealed envelope on the table. Inside was a folded note, his handwriting strong and slanted. "If one day you hear the swan playing in the streets, it means I've finished what was left undone. When that happens, you can forget me." I fell against the table, tears soaking the ink. Outside, the sea roared, as if trying to swallow the silence he left behind.
I left Lisbon 2 months later. I went anywhere I could write, anywhere I could pretend to forget.
London, Prague, Rome, each city became a fragment of time where I hid my memories of him. But memory isn't something you can abandon. One night, in a small cafe near Rome's Trevi Square, I heard a piano. A melody so familiar that my heart stopped the Swan by Saint-Saëns. I ran outside, into the first rain of autumn. The pianist sat with his back to me, tall, in a black coat. I walked closer slowly. But when the last note faded, he stood, disappearing into the crowd before I could speak. I called out, but the sound of rain and voices swallowed my words. On the piano lid, someone had left a single coin, and beneath it, a small folded note. "Don't look for me, because if I'm still alive, it means you're still safe." I sat there, the rain cold against my skin. The city hummed around me, alive and indifferent, while inside me stretched an emptiness that refused to fade. I knew he was still out there alive, fighting the world's shadows in his own way. And I also knew that our love didn't need a happy ending. Sometimes, just knowing the person you love still breathes under the same sky, that's enough. Years later, I published my first book. Not an exposé, but a novel titled The Man Who Couldn't Stay. It told the story of a man born in darkness who still chose to love, even knowing that love would never belong to the light. At the launch event, someone asked, "Is this story true?" I smiled. Aren't all love stories true? One late autumn afternoon in Paris, I passed a small street near the Seine. Music drifted from a cafe at the corner. A piano clair de lune? I stopped, my heart pounding. Through the fogged window, I caught a glimpse of a man at the piano. White shirt, streaks of silver in his hair, his hands steady and graceful as ever. He looked up and his gaze met mine through the glass. No words, no gestures. Just a smile, tired, peaceful, real enough to steal my breath. Then he looked down again and kept playing, as if it had all been a passing dream. I stood there for a long time, listening until the final note dissolved. By the time the music faded, the sky had turned to dusk. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. Because I understood sometimes we meet again not to begin anew, but to believe that love, after surviving fire and distance, can still exist like a melody, one that never truly ends. That night, back in my hotel room, I opened my journal and wrote the final lines. We are all wanderers, lost in the worlds we build for ourselves. But if someone once touched your soul with a look so real, then even if they leave, your heart will never be alone. I set down my pen and smiled faintly. Outside, Paris shimmered under the streetlights. The Seine glowed gold. And somewhere out there, I knew Vincent Hale was still alive. Spring returned to Chicago. Across the sky, flocks of birds curved in sweeping arcs, gliding over Lake Michigan, where sunlight spilled golden like honey across the rippling water. The city seemed reborn softer, slower, and somehow less cold beneath the first light of morning. A year had passed since that rainy night in Paris. I still remembered his gaze through the fogged glass, that fleeting, cloud-like smile before it vanished with the last note of music. We never said goodbye. Perhaps because in real love, silence is sometimes the truest way to say we will carry each other, always, even when life changes everything else. I returned to the City Watch newsroom. The old building was still there, white walls, the smell of ink, the hum of printers, and familiar faces from another lifetime. Jessica was waiting in the hallway, her smile a mix of surprise and warmth. You really came back. I owed it to myself, I said, to finish that story. The story I meant wasn't the novel I'd published, but the one never told the truth about Hale. I had spent all winter retracing his trail secret transfers, hidden organizations under false names. And, ironically, under the alias Vince Morel, he had been running a discreet relief fund for victims of human trafficking. No more mafia empire, no wealth, no fame. Only a man quietly atoning, helping others find what he himself had once lost freedom. I sat before my screen, the cursor blinking on a blank page. The title appeared, The Man Without Shadows. I wrote for hours, each line drawn from memory. His eyes the first time I saw him amid the falling snow. The thin scar on his wrist. His quiet voice when he said, I don't need to be believed innocent only to be understood. I wasn't writing to redeem him. I knew he didn't seek redemption. I wrote because I wanted the world to know that sometimes, the most cursed souls can still bring light to others. When the article was finished, I signed it with the initials B. I didn't wait for feedback. I just left the office and walked along Michigan Avenue in the late afternoon. The sunset stretched like silk across the glass towers, warm and still. I stopped at a small cafe at the corner, the same one where I'd written my very first City Watch article years ago. Live music drifted from inside a familiar melody. Clair de Lune. I froze. No, it had to be coincidence. But then among the strangers, I saw him. Vincent sat at the old piano, white shirt, hair brushing his collar, the amber light wrapping around him like a halo of dust and memory. He played as if there had never been distance, never any pain. And when he looked up, his eyes found mine. No words, just a smile calm, warm, like sunlight touching a wound that had finally healed.
After the performance, we walked together along the lakeshore.
The spring breeze carried the scent of water and laughter from nearby strangers. Vincent slipped his hands into his pockets, his gaze resting on the silver shimmer of the lake. I read your article. I know, I said softly. Are you angry? No, I think it was your way of forgiving me. And have you forgiven yourself? He was quiet for a long moment, then smiled faintly. Not yet, but at least I'm learning how to live with it. I looked at him. That face no longer carried the hardness it once did, only the calm of a man who had walked through fire and no longer wished to burn anyone else. We sat on the stone steps by the lake. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a silver ring shaped like a hawk, the one I had thrown into the Seine. I found it in Paris. Why? Because it once belonged to Gabriel, and because I knew, sooner or later, it would bring you back. I looked at the ring, the silver glint catching the dusk light, alive again. What will you do with it?
Put it where it truly belongs.
He took my hand and placed the ring in my palm. It used to stand for power, darkness, guilt, but today, if you want, it can simply be a memory of two people who found each other amid the chaos. I laughed softly, tears falling before I noticed. Not out of sorrow, but because in that moment, I finally saw the real Vincent, not the boss, not the fugitive, but a man who dared to love in a world that never allowed him to.
We stayed there until the city lights came on. Their reflections shimmered across the water like 1,000 tiny stars.
He turned to me, voice low and steady. Natalie, if one day I disappear again, will you be angry? No, I whispered, as long as this time you disappear in peace. He smiled that quiet, weary, beautiful smile.
I don't know how much time I have left, but there's one thing I'm certain of. You're the one part of me I never want to forget. I touched his face and murmured, You don't have to remember, because true love, even when forgotten, never leaves. The next morning, sunlight flooded the room. Vincent was gone, but this time, there was no emptiness. Only a single letter on the table, handwritten and simple. Thank you for giving me a reason to exist in this world. If there's another life, I hope I can love you without hiding. Beside it lay a small sprig of dried lavender, the same flower I used to keep on my desk years ago. I didn't cry. I just smiled, because I knew at last we had both found our way out of the darkness. We didn't need to be together to love. It was enough to know the other was alive, and at peace. Years later, someone asked me, Natalie, did that story have a happy ending? I only said, Love doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful. Some people come not to stay, but to remind us that light is real, even in the darkest night. The sky over Chicago deepened into violet. The city's reflection shimmered across the lake, like memories returning to life. I closed my notebook and took a deep breath. The wind carried a faint scent of lavender. And somewhere in this vast world, I knew he was smiling. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel and share your thoughts below. Every comment is a spark that keeps stories alive and helps them reach more hearts.